in the heart of rural Kansas, where wide roads stretch between golden cornfields and time moves just a little slower, there was a diner that never closed its doors. It sat on the edge of a two-lane highway, its neon sign flickering in tired red letters that spelled Masons. Truckers knew it for the coffee, locals for the pie, and high school students for the greasy fries that seemed to cure heartbreak and hangovers with equal efficiency. But beyond the bustle of the booths and the sizzle of the griddle stood a narrow hallway that led to the back, where Mary Lou spent her days unseen. At 76 years old, Mary Lou had become a permanent fixture behind the metal-swinging door. She washed dishes with quiet rhythm, her hands red from hot water and dish soap, her back slightly curved from decades of leaning over sinks. She didn't complain. She never did. Each morning, she arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, wearing the same navy blue uniform, a white apron, her silvery hair tucked under a net. No one ever saw her enter or leave, and if they did, they rarely paid attention. She wasn't a waitress, so she didn't get tips. She wasn't a cook, so she didn't get credit for the food. And she wasn't young, so she didn't get noticed. To most people, Mary Lou was just there. She didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, her replies were soft and short. Morning. Yes. No, I'll get to that. The regulars at Mason's refer to her as the old dish lady or simply her, as if even a name was more attention than she warranted. The diner manager, Dave, kept her on more out of habit than need. He was in his 40s, with a beer belly and a temper that flared whenever things got chaotic. But when it came to Mary Lou, he turned a little gentler, lowering his voice and offering her a chair during slow hours. Some days he seemed to forget she was even there. Other times, he'd look at her with an expression of reluctant gratitude, as if her constant presence anchored something he couldn't quite name. Mary Lou lived in a small rented trailer at the edge of town, in a lot with gravel crunched underfoot and dogs barked behind chain-link fences. She had no car, so she walked to the diner each day with a canvas bag on her shoulder and orthopedic shoes that scuffed along the pavement. Neighbors didn't know much about her. Rumor had it she'd once been married, that her husband had died long ago, and that she'd never remarried. No children, no visitors, just her and the dishes. Yet there was a quiet dignity to the way she moved, methodical, patient, never rushed. Some of the younger staff joked about how she was like a ghost who lived in the kitchen. They didn't mean harm. They simply didn't know her. To them, she was part of the building, part of the background. One Thursday morning in early October, a group of high school boys filed into the diner just after sunrise. They wore Letterman jackets, their hair still damp from showers after football practice. Loud, joking, and hungry, they slid into two booths near the window, laughing over something that had happened on the field. The waitress on duty, Carly, rolled her eyes and grabbed her notepad, ready to endure their usual antics. Mary Lou could hear their voices from back, each laugh echoing through the tile and steel. She barely noticed anymore. Over the years, the sound of the diner had become a kind of white noise. Sizzling bacon, clattering plates, buzzing overhead lights, the occasional country song humming from the old jukebox. She was too focused on her work, stacking clean dishes, drying utensils with a faded towel, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. And that was when it happened. As she reached up to place a tray on the upper rack, the sleeve of her uniform slipped slightly, just enough, just for a moment. It revealed a faded mark on her forearm, an old tattoo nearly swallowed by age and sunspots. A set of numbers, inked in dark blue, barely legible unless you were close. And someone was among the group of teenagers. One boy had been quiet. He sat at the edge of the booth, his plate untouched, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something different. His name was Aiden. He was 16, a junior, and unlike his friends, he wasn't laughing. He noticed Mary Lou when they first walked in. Not just her presence, but the way she moved. Quietly, precisely, like someone who knew what it meant to be forgotten. He hadn't meant to stare. But when the sleeve slipped and he caught sight of that tattoo, something inside him froze. He blinked, stared harder, then stood up slowly, ignoring the calls from his friends. He walked toward the kitchen door, hesitant, unsure, until he could see her more clearly. She didn't notice him at first, until he was only a few feet away. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mary Lou turned, surprised, her expression neutral. "Is that a tattoo?" he asked. She glanced down at her arm, then quickly tugged the sleeve down. "It's nothing," she said, but her voice trembled slightly. "Please," Aiden said. "Can I see it again?" She hesitated. Something in his face, earnest, not mocking, made her nod once. Slowly, she rolled the sleeve back up. The boy leaned in. His eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. The numbers were unmistakable. 4 digits, an old military style, the kind used decades ago. And something about them stirred a memory, one he'd seen in a photo that had been shown to him many times. A photo that now lived in his wallet. He staggered back a step, eyes glassy. His friends were still joking in the background, oblivious. But Aiden was somewhere else entirely. "I've seen that tattoo before," he whispered. "My grandfather had the same one." And then, without warning, he began to cry. Silent tears at first, then a small, broken sob he tried to muffle with his sleeve. Mary Lou stood still, the towel in her hand forgotten. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. She simply looked at him, a strange, knowing sadness in her eyes. For the first time in years, someone had truly seen her. The morning after the emotional encounter, the air around Mason's diner felt unusually still, as if the weight of something unseen had settled into the corners of the worn linoleum and crept up the faded booths. The usual crowd trickled in, early risers with sun-damaged skin and mud-splattered boots, retired men in flannel who argued over headlines, and the waitress who clocked in with a yawn. They all carried on as they had for years, each unaware that something subtle, something quiet, had shifted the day before. Mary Lou moved through the kitchen with her same mechanical precision, but her thoughts were scattered, her grip less steady than usual. The boy's face, his tears, and the tremble in his voice had stayed with her all night. She had tried to sleep, but the memory clung to her like a shadow. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with recognition. Not of her job, her presence, or even her name, but of her past, of what she had once been. And not just anyone. A boy who carried the eyes of a man she used to know, eyes she thought she would never see again. Just past 8 o'clock that morning, while Mary Lou stood at the sink scrubbing remnants of scrambled eggs from a breakfast rush, the bell above the front door jingled softly. No one looked up, not right away. But Carly, wiping a menu near the register, caught sight of the boy before anyone else did. He stood there, alone this time. No Letterman jacket, no friends, just a flannel shirt too big for his frame, and a look on his face that didn't belong to someone his age. Aiden stepped further in, scanning the diner until his eyes landed on the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen. He didn't ask to be seated. He didn't approach the counter. He simply found an empty stool at the far end and sat down, hands folded on the faded Formica surface, gaze fixed on the stainless steel door that led to the back. Carly eyed him with curiosity, but said nothing. There was something solemn about the way he held himself, like a mourner waiting for a procession. Inside the kitchen, Mary Lou paused. She couldn't see the front from where she stood, but something, instinct maybe, told her he had returned. She wiped her hands on her apron, unsure whether to go out and speak to him or remain tucked away in the comfort of anonymity. But the moment passed when she heard footsteps approaching. Slow, hesitant, but unmistakably his. When Aiden stepped into the kitchen, it wasn't with the curiosity of the day before. This time, he carried something more grounded, intent. Mary Lou turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the fryer, and the hum of the overhead lights faded into the background. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he said softly. "I didn't mean to break down like that." She studied him for a long beat, then nodded slowly. "You don't have to apologize for feeling something. I think I wasn't ready to see it. That tattoo, it was like seeing a ghost." He pulled something from his wallet, creased, faded, clearly well handled. A photograph. He handed it to her. Mary Lou held it carefully, as if afraid it might disintegrate in her fingers. It was old, black and white, taken in a jungle clearing, for people stood shoulder to shoulder, 2 men, a woman, and a younger soldier crouched in front, dirt on their faces, bandages visible beneath uniforms, but smiles wide, genuine. She inhaled sharply. "You were there," Aiden whispered. "That's you, isn't it?" "Yes," she replied, barely audible. Her hand traced the image. That was taken in '69. Firebase ripcord. We had just pulled out after 3 weeks under mortar fire. Aiden watched her with reverence. "That man," he pointed to the soldier with his arm draped over her shoulders, "that's my grandfather, James Whitaker." Mary Lou closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they shimmered. "Jimmy, he used to call me Louie. Said it made me sound tougher than I looked." "He talked about you," Aiden said. "Not often, but once when I was younger, he told me a story about a nurse who saved his life. He said she dragged him out of a collapsed bunker after an explosion. He said he never got the chance to thank her properly." A long silence stretched between them. The photograph still lay in her hand, trembling slightly. "I remember that day," Mary Lou said at last. "I remember the smell of the earth, the smoke, the screaming. He had a shard of shrapnel in his leg. I thought he'd bleed out before we got to the evac point. He kept trying to make jokes. Said if he died in a nurse's arms, at least it'd be a good way to go." Aiden gave a weak smile. He would say something like that. "After the war," she continued, "we lost touch. Most of us did. Life got loud when we got home, but in all the wrong ways. People didn't want to hear about what we'd seen, what we'd done, especially from a woman." Aiden looked at her, the pieces slowly falling into place in his mind. The silence, the obscurity, the life spent behind kitchen doors. "My parents don't even know he served," Aiden admitted. "He never talked about it much after Grandma died. He just kept that picture in his nightstand." Mary Lou nodded. "Most of us learned to keep it locked away. It was easier, safer." He sat on a stool near the prep table. "But it shouldn't be locked away. It matters." She gave him a tired smile, one that held both sadness and gratitude. "You're the first person in decades to say that to me. Would you let me record you? Talking about your time there?" he asked. "For a school project. Or just for me, so I don't forget." She hesitated, not from fear, but from the sudden vulnerability of being remembered. "Come back tomorrow," she said at last, "after the morning rush. I'll tell you what I can." He nodded, rising slowly. Before he left, he turned back and said, "Thank you, Louie." The nickname lingered in the air long after he was gone, echoing down the hallway like a voice from another life. The next morning arrived draped in a soft gray light, the kind that filtered through clouds like a whispered promise of rain. Mason's diner opened as usual, the scent of bacon and brewed coffee bleeding out into the cold air, drawing the same blend of regulars and passers-by. But behind the counter, tucked near the kitchen door, Aiden sat with a notebook in his lap and an old digital recorder resting beside it. He didn't speak much to the staff, offering only a polite nod to Carly when she refilled his water glass. His eyes remained fixed on the kitchen entrance, waiting, just as Mary Lou had asked. She emerged shortly after morning rush died down, untying her apron as she walked. Her hands, though worn and calloused, moved with purpose as she laid a steaming mug of tea on the table across from him and sat down without ceremony. She didn't need to ask if he was ready. His expression said everything. Aiden pressed record. Mary Lou began slowly, her voice low and steady, with a careful cadence of someone peeling away layers that had been hardened over time. She spoke of enlisting, not out of glory or patriotism, but because she had nowhere else to go. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, and with no siblings, no home, and no clear path, she walked into a recruitment office and signed the papers that would send her into the heart of a war zone. They didn't want women there, she said. Not really, but they needed us. Nurses, mostly. Field medics. They trained us fast and dropped us faster. She described the jungle, not with fear, but with a strange affection, as if the wild chaos of Vietnam had once given her a place to belong. The mud, the noise, the constant tension of waiting for something to explode, it all came back with vivid clarity. Aiden listened, stunned by the contrast between the gentle, quiet woman across from him and the battlefield she once inhabited. Mary Lou didn't glamorize any of it. She'd talk about the men she treated, some boys younger than Aiden, screaming for their mothers as she packed wounds with gauze soaked in blood. She remembered names, faces, the way some would grip her hand like it was the last solid thing left in the world. Her voice caught once or twice, but she didn't break. She had long since learned how to speak of horror without emotion, the only way to survive it. There was this one morning, she said, eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the window. We'd been under fire for 3 days straight. No sleep, no supplies, no hope. And then a chopper came through, low and hot. It didn't land. It couldn't. But they dropped crates of morphine and bandages. We thought we were saved. And then one of the crates hit the ground wrong, exploded on impact, shrapnel everywhere. I was standing 10 feet away. Jimmy, your grandfather, he was closer. It tore through his leg like paper. I thought he was gone, but he grabbed my arm and said, "Louis, if I die, you better tell people I was laughing." He was bleeding out and making jokes. Aiden smiled faintly, shaking his head. He used to laugh like that around the house, too, like nothing could shake him. He was scared, she said quietly. We all were, but he covered it with humor. That was his armor. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather notebook. The cover was worn smooth, the spine frayed. She slid it across the table. Aiden opened it gently. Inside were sketches, rough, sometimes shaky drawings of faces, landscapes, even the occasional joke scrawled in the margins. Page after page of her life in the war, preserved in pencil and ink. I drew when I couldn't sleep, she explained. When I was scared, when I couldn't speak. That book kept me sane. He turned the pages in silence, stopping at a sketch of a familiar face. His grandfather, younger, smiling, a cigarette hanging from his lips. Beneath the sketch was a date and a single word, alive. That day, she said, I thought I'd lose him, but he made it, and then the war ended and everyone scattered. Aiden looked up from the notebook. Why didn't you try to find him? Mary Lou gave a tired sigh. When I came back, there were parades for some in silence or others. Women veterans weren't seen as heroes. I applied to hospitals, clinics. No one wanted to hire a combat nurse with no degree. They said I should go home and forget about it. But I had no home, just the memories. So I did what I could, found work washing dishes. Places like this. Aiden frowned. You deserve more than that. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe, but the world doesn't always give people what they deserve. Sometimes it gives them what's left. He sat back, silent for a long moment. Then, carefully, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a plastic sleeve. Inside was a certificate, a military commendation. Her name, Mary Louise Harlan, typed neatly in the middle. The ink had faded, but the gold seal still gleamed faintly under the diner lights. My grandfather kept this, he said, with the photo. He must have sent for it after the war. It's yours. She stared at it for several seconds, then reached out with trembling fingers. Holding it again after so many years, she looked smaller, older, and somehow stronger all at once. Her lips moved silently, mouthing the words as she read them. He never forgot you, Aiden added. He just didn't know how to talk about it. But he remembered. Mary Lou blinked back something wet in her eyes. Then, slowly, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm glad he told you, she said. I'm glad someone knows. I think more people should, Aiden replied. Your story, it matters. It's part of history. And not just for me. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes said she understood. The recorder kept running, capturing everything. The stories, the silences, the soft clink of a coffee cup as she sipped from it. In that quiet space between the past and the present, a bridge had been built, not from noise or ceremony, but from truth, unspoken for decades, now finally free. When their conversation ended, they sat for a while longer, not needing to speak. Outside, the clouds had begun to clear, and a shaft of sunlight cut through the front window, landing softly across Mary Lou's hands. She looked down at them. Hands that had once held shattered men together with thread and gauze. Hands that had buried pain beneath endless hours of forgotten labor. And for the first time in years, they no longer looked invisible. It was a Thursday when everything began to shift, not suddenly, but with the quiet persistence of something long buried, refusing to stay underground. The day started as it always did. The smell of frying bacon curling through vents, the hiss of eggs hitting the griddle, the low murmur of early customers taking their usual seats. But beneath the surface routine, Mason's Diner had begun to hum with an energy that was unfamiliar. Something unspoken had settled over the staff. Attention, maybe, or anticipation. Mary Lou had been quieter than usual, which was saying something. Her movements were slower, not from fatigue, but thoughtfulness. Her mind replayed every word she had spoken to Aiden 2 days prior. It wasn't regret. She didn't regret telling her story. But there was a vulnerability to being known again, to stepping back into the light after so many years in the shadows. The recognition was almost too much to bear. But Aiden hadn't returned the following morning, or the one after that. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was a teenager with a life full of distractions. Still, she watched the front door every time the bell rang, expecting his face, listening for his voice. Each time, she was met with strangers or regulars, and she would turn back to her work, heart just slightly heavier. On that Thursday afternoon, the diner wasn't full, but it was busy enough that no one noticed a pair of unfamiliar faces sitting at a table near the far window. A woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed, dressed in business casual layers with a satchel at her side, and a younger man with a camera bag slung across his chest. They had ordered coffee and a slice of cherry pie to share, but neither touched it. Instead, they watched, waited. Mary Lou didn't see them at first. She was in the back, restocking dishes and tidying the station, when Carly stepped in and said, "Hey, Lou, there's someone out front asking for you." Didn't say why. Mary Lou raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "No idea. They said they're not customers." "Exactly. Just people who heard something." There was a chill in Carly's voice that Mary Lou caught immediately. Not fear, not malice, just uncertainty. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out, unsure what to expect. The woman stood as soon as she approached. She extended her hand. "Mary Louise Harlan?" "Yes," Mary Lou said slowly. "My name is Rebecca Clark. I'm a history teacher at the high school. Aiden Whitaker is one of my students." Mary Lou's eyes softened. "Is he all right?" "Oh, yes. He's fine. He's the one who sent me. He showed me the recording. And the notebook." Mary Lou stiffened slightly. Her first instinct was to pull back, to question whether trust had been misplaced. But the woman's tone was not exploitative. It was reverent, almost careful. "I hope that's all right," Rebecca added quickly. "I know it was personal, but what you shared was powerful and important." Mary Lou nodded once, slowly. "What do you want?" The young man with the camera stepped forward. "If you be willing, we'd like to film an interview. Nothing fancy. Just you talking about your service, about what it was like. Aiden thinks it could be part of a Veterans History project we're doing with the local archive." Mary Lou looked down at her hands. Her fingers, reddened from hot water and soap, twitched slightly. "I'm no one special." Rebecca shook her head. "You're exactly the kind of person we want to talk to. The kind history forgets if we let it." There was a long pause. The kind that fills a room with tension, so thick it almost becomes noise. Mary Lou considered the offer. She thought about the years spent erasing herself, the silence she had accepted as normal, and she thought about the look on Aiden's face when he realized the truth, when memory turned into something living. "When?" she asked. "Whenever you're ready." They filmed it that Sunday, early in the morning before the diner opened. Rebecca borrowed a key from Dave, who, despite being confused, allowed it without protest after Aiden explained who Mary Lou really was. The counter stools were pushed aside, the lights adjusted just enough, and Mary Lou sat in her navy blue uniform. Without the apron, her hands folded neatly in her lap. At first, she was stiff. The camera lens felt like a spotlight, and her voice came out clipped and formal. But Rebecca was patient. She didn't ask grand questions. She let silence do the work, and slowly, Mary Lou relaxed. The words came easier, more fluid, until she was telling stories no one had heard since she left Vietnam. Her voice carried grief, grit, and a hint of dry humor that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She spoke of camaraderie, of the absurdity of war, of the men she treated, and the things they confessed when they thought they were dying. She talked about the chopper rides, about the letters she never sent, about the first time she held someone's life in her hands and knew she couldn't save them. When it ended, she didn't cry. She simply said, "Thank you," and walked out into the morning light as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 2 days later, the video was shared in Rebecca's classroom. Then it was shared again, this time by the principal. By the end of the week, it was on the school's homepage, and then on a local news site. People watched. People listened. And the most remarkable thing was how they responded. Customers began asking about her. Strangers left notes of thanks at the diner. A few old veterans came in just to shake her hand. Some said nothing, only nodded, but she understood the weight behind her silence. It wasn't just recognition, it was respect. Dave, never one for sentiment, awkwardly cleared his throat during a slow shift and said, "They're talking about putting your name on a wall at City Hall. Veterans display. Might even throw a parade." Mary Lou snorted. Parades are for the living, the ones who don't carry ghosts. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and went back to slicing onions. But things were changing. One morning, Aiden walked in carrying a small cardboard box. He placed it on the counter in front of her without a word. Inside were framed prints, restored versions of photographs from her notebook. One of them, enlarged and carefully mounted, was of her and Jimmy, laughing. Faces smudged with dirt, arms slung around each other like siblings. "We want to hang this up here," he said, "by the register, so people see you." Mary Lou stared at it, her throat too tight to speak. "People should know who's been standing behind that door all these years," he added. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply picked up the frame, ran her fingers along its edge, and for the first time in a very long while, allowed herself the quiet joy of being remembered. Autumn settled fully into the small Kansas town as the leaves along Main Street turned shades of ochre and rust. The air had taken on that unmistakable bite that signaled the coming of winter, and the days grew shorter with each passing week. At Mason's Diner, however, something had changed that could not be undone. The invisible woman behind the kitchen door had become, in the eyes of many, a local icon. Not for the dishes she had scrubbed for decades, but for a past few had known existed and none could now forget. The photo of Mary Lou and Jimmy, clean, color-corrected, framed in rich oak, hung just beside the cash register. Patrons, both regular and new, paused in front of it, tracing the outlines of the young faces captured in wartime stillness. Beneath it, a simple brass plaque read, "Mary Louise Harlan, Combat Nurse, Firebase Ripcord 1969. Hero among us." The wording had been Aiden's idea, and though she had protested at first, insisting she was no hero, she had quietly watched him hang it with his own hands. She had said nothing, but later that night, when the diner was closed and the lights dimmed, she stood in front of the photo alone for several minutes, her hand pressed lightly to the glass. The attention had brought with it more than curiosity. Donations began to arrive at the diner in unmarked envelopes, some with small notes, others without. A local veterans association, after watching the interview Rebecca had uploaded to their site, reached out to offer Mary Lou access to long overdue benefits, medical services, therapy, financial assistance. She had declined most of it first, unsure what to do with a system that had once left her behind. But after a long conversation with Aiden, she allowed a volunteer from the VA to help her sort through the paperwork. "You deserve this," Aiden had told her, sliding forms across the table. "Let them give back for once." She hadn't known how to reply, only that there was a warmth in the boy's eyes that steadied her in ways nothing else could. News spread in the town, then beyond it, a regional news station aired a short segment on her story, and from there, other inquiries followed, journalists, documentary students, even a retired general who sent a letter thanking her for her service and apologizing in his own stiff way. for how women like her had been forgotten. Mary Lou didn't respond to most of them. Fame was never her goal, and she had no interest in parading her scars for entertainment. But the shift in how people looked at her, that she noticed, no longer invisible, no longer a shadow in the corner. One Sunday afternoon, the diner closed early. Dave, awkward as always with emotion, had agreed, though he grumbled about the loss of business, as Aiden and a group of students from the school transformed the space into something else entirely. The front booths were cleared, replaced with rows of folding chairs. A small podium was set up near the counter. Behind it, a projection screen had been hung with care, cables snaking discreetly to a laptop. Mary Lou sat in the last row until someone asked her to move closer. She refused. She didn't need to be the center of attention. She had already been seen. That was enough. The video began without fanfare. It was the same footage recorded weeks ago, but edited with care. Overlaid images of war zones faded in and out of focus as her voice filled the space. Not as a broadcast, but as something personal. Her words held the room. When the lights came back on, not a single person moved. No applause, no chatter, just silence, the kind that held reverence. Afterward, Aiden stood at the front, hands slightly shaking, and spoke. He told them about the tattoo, about the photo in his grandfather's drawer, about the woman who had been there all along, washing dishes in the background of their lives. She saved people, he said, but we almost lost her to history. We let her disappear. That ends now. The crowd broke into quiet clapping, not the loud, performative kind, but something gentler, respectful. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Mary Lou stepped out alone, standing near the edge of the diner's lot. The sky was awash in streaks of violet and orange, the last light catching in the corners of her eyes. Aiden joined her a few minutes later, hands in his jacket pockets. "Do you think he'd be proud?" he asked without looking at her. She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, she said, "He always told me we'd survive, but surviving wasn't enough. We had to keep remembering. I forgot that part for a long time. You remember now." She nodded, her chin lifting slightly as the breeze picked up. They stood like that for a while, not needing to speak. And then, almost shyly, Aiden turned toward her and said, "I've been thinking about joining up. Military medicine. Maybe not combat, but something that matters." Mary Lou turned to look at him, not with surprise, not with protest. Just the kind of gaze someone offers when they truly see you, without judgment, without expectation. "You'd be good at it," she said simply. He smiled. "You think." "I know." Weeks passed, then months. The world moved on, as it always does. But inside Mason's, a new wall had been dedicated entirely to local veterans. Mary Lou's photo remained at the center, flanked by others who had served. The display became part of the town's identity, something school children visited, something travelers asked about. And when Mary Lou's health began to waver that winter, she found herself surrounded not by pity, but by people. Real people. The kind who came not to fix her, but to thank her. Aiden visited often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to bring her things she would never ask for. Groceries, books, even a new pair of slippers that she wore despite saying they were too soft. He sat with her through quiet afternoons, listening more than speaking, carrying forward a story that had once nearly vanished into silence. Mary Lou never asked for any of it, not the recognition, not the tribute, not the help. But what came out of that tattoo, a number inked in youth, forgotten by time, was something no one could have predicted. She had been alone for decades, surviving quietly in the margins. And now, because one boy had cared enough to look closely, her life had re-entered the world of the living. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a medal. It was better. It was belonging. And in that small diner, beneath the humming lights and the scent of coffee, a new chapter had begun. Not one written by war or pain, but by memory, truth, and the quiet revolution of being seen. At last,